This week's project was sent in by Chris, and it's this nice 3D printed model of a horse. And looking at it, I think the big issues are going to be the base is in the way. And if this was a production job, I would definitely be casting the body of the horse separate from the base. Make it much easier to cut and easier to cast in a lot of ways. But they're together here, and what that might mean is we may have to break the horse off the base. The other issue is that it's a big old mold, and I'm inclined to break out the chunkage. If you don't know what chunkage is because you're new around here, stick around and you're about to find out. Let's get going. See how thin that base is in there? That is no bueno, because when you pour a mold from the bottom, this becomes the top surface of the resin. And what happens is the resin, when it cures, it shrinks. It kind of cups. And so it's going to become paper thin right in through here. Super thin. That is not acceptable. The obvious fix when you're designing a piece for casting is you want to make the base thicker, so you have enough material that you can sand it flat later. Since we don't have that on this piece, we're going to add it. And to do that, I'm just going to use this piece of scrap masonite. So job one is going to be to trace out this base neat and tight as we can do it. Got that side, do this side. Trace it out all the way around, like that. Did we get it? Yeah, perfect. Okay, hop on over to the bandsaw, get that thing cut out. The bandsaw is a perfect tool to make quick work out of cutting out this shape. Just went around and finished the edges of my bandsaw work with a little sandpaper, smooth them out a little bit. That's good enough. And now we get to hit this kid with some beeswax. My favorite material on the earth is beeswax. The trick to waxing anything is to get the surface you're waxing hotter than the melting point of the wax. And when you do that, it just soaks right in, which is what you want. Apply the wax, apply some heat, get that stuff to melt in. Now what we want to do is we want to fit this onto here. Just like that. See how that's going to build up that edge? To do that, let's fire up the sticky wax. This sticky wax rod, sticky wax stick, was provided by our friends at Freeman Wax. So we're just going to dab some sticky wax on this thing. Get it nice and hot. Let's get this to fit as close as we can. Also provided by Freeman Wax, I shaved off brown microcrystalline wax. It's just really a sculptor's wax, but it's really useful for little bits of things like this. Like I want the seam of the sculpture to match the seam of the wood that I put on there, and it is working like a champ. Look at that. Can you see that, how well that's working? Sealing up that, make that just a nice kind of continuous edge with that, so there's no seam to deal with later. I'll get this seam all waxed up, and then we'll be ready to put the horse in the mold case. We need to figure out exactly where we're going to put the vents on this boy, and here he is hanging up exactly how he's going to be in space. He's going to pour through the base, and right away you can see where all the high points are. Clearly we're going to have to connect this tail, because that is a huge, gigantic bubble trap, so we're going to have to let the air out of this tail. But notice right in the middle of the stomach, see how that's a high point? And then the most obvious one of all, of course, is the front hoof. So we know we need a minimum of 3 vents, but there's another one I think I'm going to do, and that's down here under the chin. I think we're going to run a vent right in like that. We're going to let the air out of that chin and let it flow up into the cavity of the body. Here, I'll do this vent in front here so you can see how I do it. Just put a little dab of sticky wax right on the hoof. And you don't have to have straight vents, they can be bent. Attach that up there, get it nicely attached. Just going to take a little bit of wax, sticky wax, and attach it. Then, go ahead and just cut it off like that. All right, that looks pretty well attached. So when the resin rises up, it's just going to rise right up that tip and right out of that sprue. Well, I'm just going to do the exact same thing back here on the tail. Just going to put a little rod of wax right in there, like that, and we'll be ready to go. Time to design the case for this child. For this horse, Are we going to be able to get this thing in the tank, yes or no? I would like to pressure pot this kid, if I can. Very much would like to do so. What we know right now is that is the biggest block of rubber that we're going to need. I'm still not madly in love with wasting this space, this amount of material. Just want to show you guys that it's often useful to fill the mold space. So now that we have the dimensions, we can start cutting wood to make this box. All the wood pieces are cut and drilled, and I also waxed them exactly the way you saw me wax the base earlier. So let's get this case assembled. Should go together real nice. There we go. All right, let's see what we got. Very nice, looking good. I didn't bother to cut fancy joints because I knew I could just use the brown microcrystalline wax to seal the joint. Time to get this horse into this case, and in order to do that, we're going to stick him in with sticky wax. Just a few drops of sticky wax, not too much. You get the wax nice and hot, get the surface hot, so the wax will lay flat, and then it's a simple enough matter of putting in the horse. Got the horse mounted in the case, looking good. We're ready to pour rubber on this boy, but I thought it would be a good idea, because I don't know what kind of resin this was printed with, to test to make sure that the rubber is going to cure against it. So I put a little dollop on there last night. Let's see how we did. Feels pretty good, feels pretty good. Oh yeah, peeled right off. All right, so we know we're good to go. And if you will recall, we used this brown microcrystalline wax to seal up the edges of the box. So I thought, better check this wax. I'm pretty sure, because this is a sculptor's wax, that this is going to be okay. But oh yeah. Nah, loop came right up. Look at that. No worries. We're ready to put the plexiglass front on this mold. But first, we got to seal it up. We got to build the gasket because it'll leak. So you could brush it on. I'm just using a stick. No problem. Just want to make a nice gasket. It's very useful to assemble the mold box with the same materials you're going to pour the rubber in. The more different kinds of materials you have in a construction, the more mixed media your construction is, in mold making anyway, the more potential there is for mistakes, the more potential there is for incompatibilities. And so I like to keep it all the same. So why use a gasket material that could react with your rubber when the rubber makes the perfect gasket material? Put this on here, just like that. Let's locate some holes. You can just see how those screws are drawing that plastic tight to the box. Makes a nice seal. Very good. We have got a box sealed up and ready to pour. If you've watched my channel before, you've seen me do this. But if you're new to the channel, I'm going to show you a technique today that's super secret, little known. Only very advanced mold makers know this technique. And it's called Dunkin' Chunkies. And chunkies are nothing more than cut up chunks of old molds. And I just wanted to show you a couple of things. The reason that you would do this is there's these big areas of mold that's going to suck up a lot of rubber. And chunkies of old molds are a really great way to fill up those spaces. You want your chunk with clean sides. What you need are pristine chunks. And when you have a lot of texture, like, can you see this texture in there? See that? When you have a lot of texture that looks like that, you have more of a possibility of catching bubbles. I like to cut that off like that and just get rid of those kinds of textures. In a perfect world, you would keep your molds in sealed up bags so they stay nice and clean. But the reality is, usually they're laying around the shop and they get dirty and they get grimy, and you can really see the color difference between a dirty mold and nice, clean, pristine chunks, and you want them to be clean. And the reason you don't want this is that could form a really nice resist, and it could prevent the new rubber from bonding to the old rubber. So what I do, I just take a utility knife, go through, cut the chunks, And then you look for the surfaces that aren't clean and you cut those off. You are going to have some waste doing this, but it's still worth the time to do it. Again, you got to beware of surfaces and things that could catch bubbles in the chunks because you don't want that. And let's get to pouring some rubber and dunking some chunkies. I mixed up the first bucket of rubber, and what we want to do is we want to pour, as always, all the way down to the bottom. You try never to drape your model with rubber because you can trap bubbles real easy that way. That's the quick way to trap bubbles, is to drape or pour your rubber all over the top of your model. That's a big no-no because you can really trap yourself a bunch of bubbles. Now the rubber is coming to this back corner. It's doing it just perfectly coming in. Okay, so now the whole base is filled, and we can just go ahead and dump the rest of this rubber. Now I have found the best tool for inserting chunkies is just a sharpened stick. All I did was sharpen up a dowel, and I wanted a long stick because I wanted to be able to reach in like this. So you just spear each piece like that, and away you go. You just jam it in. Whammer, jammer it on in. We can really push in a lot of chunks up in this part of the mold. This is really where most of the chunks are going to live, is in the top half of the mold. You can see how much room there was. There was very little room down around the base and the body. There wasn't a lot of room in the mold. Up here, there's a lot more. So we're going to want a lot of chunks to fill up this mold. Okay, let's top this guy. Last pour. And again, this is the most critical part. We want to make sure that the rubber rises up around that face. I'm just going to go no chunkies on the last pour. That way they'll be well buried. All right, mold is poured. Let's wait till tomorrow, and then we'll cut them open and see what we got. And let's pull this mold apart. Okay, that's the back side. Let's do the front side. Fewer screws on the front. Let's see how easy this thing comes apart. Should just come apart. Break the suction. All right, feels good. Flash is all cured. Nice. Okay. Same thing. If we can just pop it off. There we go. All right, coming right off. Nice. Okay. That was pretty easy. Flash is all cured. Now let's see if we can get the side pieces off. The bigger the mold, the more you have to work to take it apart. There we go. Did get some leakage there a little bit. All right, now we got to pop it off the base. Pop the sculpture off the case, and it's stuck on there by the base. It's wanting to pull the mold away from the base, so there we go. Let's just put a knife down in there and pop that off of there. All right. And let's see if this piece of masonite is going to pop off. Looks like it is. Yeah, okay, that's what came off. This is the piece that was coming off. Quite a bit of flash, but otherwise, looking good. Let's talk about the cut pattern that we're going to use on this boy. You got your tail hanging out around here, and you got your body of the beast. You got the head. Got the body of the beast, more or less like that. Then, of course, you've got your base. And it's in a box, it's in a mold. So it's just for fun, draw the mold. All right. Beautiful. There's our boy. Now, the classic cut pattern for a 4-footed animal would be to just do this. Come right up the middle. This is on the underside, all the way up to the tip of the nose. You got your legs, of course, are here. And generally speaking, all you have to do to free it up, you might even have a tail. It's like this. So you've got holes. You can see where the holes are. Show you where the holes are. This right in here, that's a hole. This is a hole. There might be others. Oh yeah, this foot up here touches to the base because there's a vent there. So that's a hole. So you got holes in various places. But the classic way to cut a 4-footed animal is just to cut up the center, and don't forget too, there's a vent. So we know we have a vent here, and we have a vent in here, and we have a vent in the tail in there somewhere, or in here. So we got to make sure we cut through all of those vents. So the classic way to do it is to just cross like that. And so the mold halves look like this. Like that. This should have cut all the way to the end. Like that. Oops, drew that wrong. This is a hole, so this has to also cut down like this. So that's an interesting, I'll show you what to do about that. This one we have to cut this vent. The complication is this very unhappy base that's in our way. Because this base is blocking me from being able to make these cuts on the inside here. There's no way to get to these cuts. Because the base is in the way, it's very likely I'm going to have to break the horse off of the base to be able to make that cut. I spent my career as a wax sculptor, so it's very common for me to break my models when I take them out of the mold. So yeah, I'm not that worried about breaking a model. Frankly, you can just glue it back together. This is a 3D print. It's not precious. You can just print another one. So if it breaks, it breaks. If I can get it out without it, I will. If I can't, I won't. As predicted, there's essentially no way for me to get in to where I need to cut with this base in the way. So let's see if we can't do something about that. Sorry, Chris, but it's got to come apart. Let's see if I can even do it. Let's see if it'll even come apart. Let's see if this will even come apart. Well, maybe if I could get to it over in here, I believe we could cut down this vent, which I have to do anyway. Just almost always the hardest part when you're cutting a mold is when you start. It's hard to start, especially on bigger molds. They always put up a fight. Once you get more rubber to grab, then you can usually get them apart. There is just no way I'm going to be able to reach in there and cut this apart without breaking this base. But this resin was a lot tougher than I thought it was. So I'm just gonna yank on it. Just really, there it goes. Whew, okay, got it. There it went. All right, got it out. Gotta say, that plastic put up way more of a fight than I expected it to, but we did get it. So now we're just gonna try to cut down to the middle, cut these legs free, cut that tail free. Here I am cutting across to the legs. Got that leg. Freed that leg. See that? See I freed that leg? I'll see if we can free the other leg. There, we just cut that hole. See, can you see that hole that I just cut between the legs and the... This would have been a hole if this was all connected. It's not connected anymore, so it gave us access to it. Now we have to do the same thing over here. I know I have complained about this before, but it's way harder to cut these things so that you can see me do it than it is to do it just when I'm off camera. Even with the base off, this horse is pretty tricky to cut. Molds this size put up quite a fight, and it's difficult to get them started, and more than that, it's difficult to see where you're going. You just have to plan it out and cut carefully and hope that you get the piece cut the way you anticipated cutting it. Sorry that you didn't see the end of the cutting, but my camera shut off and didn't tell me, and these things happen. We did get the horse cut out as predicted. I had to break him off his base. This resin was shockingly difficult to break. It was much tougher than I expected it to be, but it did break clean and it can easily be repaired. But something else happened that I'm not pleased about, and we'll have to deal with it next week when we cast these pieces. And that is that I trapped a piece of rubber in a really difficult place in here between the legs and the tail, and it just totally got trapped, and I was left with no other alternative but to turn my beautiful, fantastic one-piece cut mold into a two-piece cut mold. So there's the big giant piece, and then there's this little bitty piece. It's not a big deal. It actually fits back in really neatly, and the mold closes up neatly, so it's going to make good castings. But I can't stand when this thing happens, because you got to not lose this little chunk as long as you're casting in this mold. And it's one more step to fit it back in and carefully close the rubber around it. These things happen, and you just got to adjust. Like I said, I'm very confident that this mold is going to give us good castings. Even with this flaw, the flaws in the extra parting lines are pretty well hidden inside where they're not going to be seen, but they're still fairly easy to clean up. We'll be dealing with that next week. Hey, I hope you got something out of this video, and I hope you liked it. If you did, hit that like button, because it really does help the channel. Thanks for watching. I will see you next week.